Welcome to Client Orientation for clients of projects for the IB Computer Science Internal Assessment. First of all, thank you. Thank you so much for volunteering to be a client for this student. This is an important part of this course, and without the proper problem and the proper client, then this just wouldn't happen. The purpose of this presentation is to give you an idea of, first of all, what the IA is all about, what other people are involved in this IA process, what the client's role entails, and finally, to give you an overview of the process that the student will be following. So the internal assessment, IA, requires the student to build a system to solve a problem. And by system, we mean something that takes an input, processes it, and provides an output. Once it's built, the system should be functional without the need of the student or any other programmer. It should be a self-sustaining system. The student, for their internal assessment, needs to document the planning, designing, and development of the whole thing. It is mostly graded on their documentation rather than the code itself. Some of the people involved in this process are, of course, the student and the client. But there's also stakeholders, other people who will be affected by the project and who might have input to provide for the project. I, their teacher, am also involved as their supervisor. I make sure that they're on the right track and doing the project according to what the IB sees. If something gets a little off track, I come in and I help get it back on track. Finally, there's also an advisor. And the advisor is the technical advisor, the person responsible for helping the student out with technical problems. In nearly all the cases, this is also me. So, what's the client's role? First and foremost, they have a problem that they bring to the table that needs to be solved. Another thing they need to do is identify stakeholders. Who are the other people involved? And perhaps if the student needs to interview those people, help facilitate that. All this is to provide project requirements so the student knows what they're building, and then finally give feedback to the student when the student needs it on, of course, their work. Let's talk a bit about the process. So phase one of the process is what we call the project launch. In this phase, students must perform project discovery to gather project requirements, which initially are noted as user stories. A bit more on that in a moment. In order to complete project discovery, the student will have to conduct at least 2 interviews with the client and record the audio for them. It's very important because later the student will be transcribing that audio and passing that transcription on to the IB. After the first interview, the student will go and design a mock-up of the product. So they'll take the problem from the client, think up a solution, and present a mock-up or a wireframe of that. So a very basic kind of visual version of it. Not an actual functional version, but it just looks like it. Finally, after that, they'll be able to set the success criteria for the IA, and success criteria is what the IB refers to as the project requirements. So, I mentioned user stories. What are those? These are very important, especially at the beginning. A user story is a way of recording project requirements that help create discussion. This is currently used in the industry for developing software. The basic formula of a user story is, as it says here, as a, and you specify a type of user, I want, and the goal that the user wants to achieve, so that, and provide some reason. Now, you could just have the first part and the last part so that with the reason you can skip. It depends how detailed it needs to be. User stories should be about the users and their needs, not about the software and the features. And students will use these user stories to then, in turn, develop their success criteria, which will be about the software and the features. But they'll do that later, and they'll present those in another meeting to you. Let me give you some examples of user stories. So here are some examples I took from a website. The following are typical user stories for a job posting and search site. So as you can see, a user can post her resume to a website. A user can search for jobs. A company can post new job openings, and a user can limit who can see her resume. So notice what's not mentioned in these. There's no mentions of having a certain button that does something, a menu or a drop-down, or anything that really imposes any structure on the student. These user stories are meant to be open because it really facilitates in the design process if there aren't those kinds of restraints. Maybe having a button of some sort is the best idea, but not being committed to that right off the bat is what's important. So of course, during your interview with the student, you can share any ideas you have of what you imagine a system like this looking like, but what's important is to not impose those by putting them in the wording of the user story. After phase 1 is complete, phase 2 will begin, and phase 2 is much longer. It is made up of several sprints, and a sprint can be anywhere between 2 to 4 weeks. During a sprint, a student selects one or more success criteria, and they work on it for those 2 to 4 weeks. At the end of the sprint, ideally, the student will present the client with what they've achieved at the end of that sprint to have like a fully functional single feature. Ideally, this project, the whole IA development phase, should be completed in about 3 to 4 sprints, so that could be 1 trimester of work. Finally, after the sprinting is done and the project is completed, we'll have a formal presentation of that and a final review with you, the client, which will also be recorded. After that, they will compile all their documentation from their areas that they've collected along the way and make it submittable to the IB for review. And after that, they'll celebrate completion. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you very much.